News media uses visual imagery to frame and influence public perceptions of refugee crises. Depending upon how these visuals are framed, they work to either humanize or dehumanize refugees and asylum seekers. Media frame theory is an essential aspect to the understanding of how media influences public perception, as the theory posits that it is the media which chooses which issues to report, and how much they are reported, thereby deeming what issues are considered important to the public. Through using this understanding of media frame theory, let's look at one of the largest ongoing refugee crises, that of the Rohingya people in Myanmar, and how the media is able to affect public perception of the crisis. The Rohingyans are a primarily Muslim ethnic minority who face the continued genocide perpetrated by the Myanmar military, through a series of persecutions and killings beginning in 2015, which has led to the forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. Many of the Rohingya people came to Myanmar, at the time known as Burma, during English colonial rule to seek work.
Union Jack had been replaced by the flag of independent Burma. The members of the new government were sworn in.
But since 1948, when Myanmar became an independent republic, the government has refused to accept Rohingyans as citizens, and claims that their entry into the country was illegal. Now, without freedom of movement and barred from citizenship, the Rohingya people are a stateless group confined to camps on the sea-based border of Myanmar, without adequate food, healthcare, education, or safety. The key types of visual imagery used in media which humanizes refugees include the use of close-ups, first-person interviews, and focusing on women and children. Visual elements related to humanized imagery are focused on stirring and strengthening an emotional and sympathetic connection between the viewer and the refugees on screen. The use of close-ups enable the viewer to empathize with the refugee subject more readily because the zoomed-in lens of the camera highlights the person's features and expressions. In particular, the expressions which are emphasized are that of exhaustion, pain, and grief. This footage of an interview between CNN correspondents and Rohingya refugees highlights the example of humanitarian visual imagery through its use of close-ups on women and children who are visibly exhausted and where flies buzz around a child's face. First-person interviews are incredibly effective in creating a connection between the viewer and the subject, and aiding in the humanization of refugees because of the identifiable victim effect, which argues that viewers will feel a great amount of empathy for and propensity to help or give aid when shown images of individual people describing their struggles as opposed to large groups. Focusing on individual, detailed accounts through first-person interviews enables refugees and asylum seekers to center their own voice and lived experiences, thereby ensuring agency over their stories. This ties into the greatest tool at the media's disposal in terms of humanizing refugees: human connection and identifiability. When people feel that they can recognize themselves in a story or identify emotionally with it, they care more. In the case of Myanmar, footage captured on cell phones by Rohingya people able to escape show in shocking and horrific detail the genocide enacted upon them. Burning of villages, rapes, and killings have all been captured, and the media is able to circulate that footage to bring it to a wider audience. This leads to public support and defense of refugees by raising awareness over the circumstances that lead to refugees' need for leaving their home country and the hardships and dangers they face while fleeing for their safety. Dehumanizing visual imagery also works to strengthen and elicit an emotional response from the viewer. But instead of garnering sympathy, the goal is to emphasize fear through the connections of criminality and violence. Dehumanizing visuals typically portray refugees as wild, angry, violent, and unpredictable. When close-up shots are used, they depict anger and hostility as the main facial expressions. More frequently than close-ups, however, wide shots of large masses of refugees are used in dehumanizing media. Studies have shown that participants who were shown images of groups of refugees were less likely to associate secondary emotions with the subjects of the images, thereby allowing for increased dehumanization. The wide shot image reinforces the cinematic spectacle and disengages from the human perspective, allowing the viewer to create a distance between them and the struggles shown on screen. Large masses without discernible features lead to anonymity and a less sympathetic viewing of the struggles shown. For years, the symbolism of water-based imagery and rhetoric has been used to strengthen fear and apprehension of refugees among viewers. Images of masses of people traveling on boats have been used excessively to highlight refugee crises, and terms such as flooding and waves of people strengthen the idea that refugees are an uncontrollable threat that viewers should fear. In the example of Myanmar, the Burmese government has weaponized restraint to water-based imagery and fear through propaganda that dehumanizes Rohingya refugees. The Burmese government, when speaking about Rohingya refugees, refuses to call them by their ethnic name, and rather only refer to them as boat people, thereby reinforcing a threatening image to Myanmar citizens who obtain their news and thereby perception of the Rohingya refugees through the propaganda. When refugees are dehumanized, it is easier for those in the host country to assume that the struggles they face are blown out of proportion, or that they're even deserving of the struggles, which then makes integration and assimilation of refugees into the host country that much more difficult, because they are met with suspicious and hostile hosts whose perceptions have been influenced by a dehumanized portrayal of refugees. In the case of Myanmar, this is exacerbated because the genocide is ongoing, so any media portrayal of refugees by the Myanmar government has the power to influence, shape, and subvert the citizens' views of the crisis. The media's role in circulating, framing, and highlighting specific images of refugees as either humanized or dehumanized has the power to influence voting patterns, aid given to refugees, and overall acceptance of them, which is why it is imperative to acknowledge how the way that the media chooses to frame refugee issues and to what scale they do so is what shapes public perception of refugees and asylum seekers.